Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is so wonderful to be here at Peace Church. In doing good and important work in the community, you all, I would say, punch way above your weight. I'm just looking at your website, your extensive list of justice partners that you put up on your website speaks to your concern for the marginalized in our city and in our world. I'm particularly grateful that my colleague and friend, Reverend Holly McKissick, has a congregation that has a real appreciation for her gifts, for her gift of intellect, of passion, and compassion. I know particularly of the work of your spiritual leader. You all know about Holly's commitment to seeking out a more just world. She shows up anywhere and everywhere there's an injustice to be challenged, but that hardly shines a full light on her work and her spirit. Holly is a shining example of how to better people's existence one person at a time. She does all the little things in actually spending time with marginalized people, the work that many find uncomfortable, and the work that usually goes unnoticed. Also, as a friend and now longtime study partner, she never lets an opportunity go by to extend a good wish over the joys in people's lives or offer real support during difficult times. Holly is what we refer to in our world in Yiddish as a good neshama, a good soul. It's my highest compliment, actually. So now, that said, I need to set the record straight on the overly generous write-up of me on your website, and apparently the way in which Holly has characterized me, both here today and for purposes of publicizing my participation in your service this morning. First, as somewhat of an aside, that someone felt that my participation was worth a few KCUR ads is a bit disconcerting. I am more than happy and honored to be here. I'll be really surprised, nay shocked, if you pick up a new member here at Peace Church because the rabbi spoke at your service. Holly shared with me her suggested version of the KCUR ad, which figuratively speaking got left on the cutting room floor. Probably with good reason. She describes me, if I got this right, and you said it again there this morning, as a visionary leader. Full confession, I have strabismus, which aka is also known as a lazy eye. This has rendered me particularly challenged in regard to my depth perception. In Little League Baseball, I used to field a lot of ground balls with my face. All of which is to say that you can accuse me of a lot of things, but this vision challenge rabbi as a visionary, not so much. One other thing, as far as setting the record straight, there's mention on the website that I'm Joe's good luck charm in attending Chiefs playoff games. I once broached this idea to Joe. I gathered from Joe's response that he's not prone to superstition, nor allowing me to claim that mantle, even though my record of attending Chiefs games with Joe is unblemished. The only valid conclusion is that Joe is possessed of an enormous generosity of spirit. And I think a better test would be if we start attending Royals games together, particularly when they're playing the Dodgers. So coming up with a topic for today, I struggled with what I felt was the need to find a balance between imparting some information on my Jewish world and something that would have more universal resonance. I was and am also concerned about finding a balance between the need to disseminate some interesting Jewish knowledge and something that might connect on an emotional level, something that we clergy tend to want to do with our folks. I will tell you, as an absolute aside, I once titled a sermon I gave at All Souls as, "What are those wacky Jews up to now?" So settling on a run through the Jewish calendar would on its face seem pretty dry, at least drier than a summer day in Kansas City, and somewhat of a sleeper. But to somewhat give away the ending, the Jewish calendar is constructed with a purposeful emotional flow. And it is this emotional flow that I think informs how we as clergy support our congregants and give our congregants the needed motivation to keep engaging in the work of pursuing justice. Arguably, Jewish theology would not land in a place of engagement on an emotional level. I often reference Jewish theology, really, when I say theology, really how we engage with God, and in so doing, how we engage with each other. As what I characterize as a behavior-based rather than a faith-based theology. Judaism tells you how to act in exhaustive detail, but does not necessarily tell you how to feel about it. This is where any statement regarding Jewish thought gets a pushback, and since there's no other rabbi here to argue with me, I have to argue with myself. The way we reference this dynamic is machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven. Another way to put it is the saying that the only thing you can get two Jews to agree on is how much the third Jew should be kicking into the synagogue. So the pushback is this: with the limitations of our human intellect, there are things beyond our understanding. In what we refer to as our written Torah, our sacred text, also known as the 5 books of Moses, whether questions such as whether it's sourced from God or from humans drawing on divine inspiration, or questions such as how we characterize our what we call eschatological speculation. Is there an afterlife? What are the characteristics of God? Who or what is God? These difficult to answer questions leave us to have to buy in based on some modicum of faith. And much in the way we seek to know but can only imagine a sense of God and to apprehend God's will, what God expects of us, I think the purpose of all religion, at least the more sane ones, is to get beyond the world that is, beyond present knowledge, to imagine a just, compassionate, and peaceful world, the world that could and should be. All that relies to some extent on faith. So with that wordy backdrop, here's the survey of the Jewish calendar. And first, an understanding that the Jewish calendar can be pretty confusing. First of all, it's a lunar calendar with adjustments to keep it somewhat on track with the Gregorian or solar calendar. We have holidays that in their origin are agrarian and therefore need to remain in their seasons. The adjustments to keep on track with Gregorian calendar come in the form of 7 leap years out of every 19 years in which we add an extra month rather than an extra day. That explains why, in relation to the Gregorian calendar, Jewish holidays may be perceived as either early this year or late this year, even though they always land on the same day on the Jewish calendar. So, for example, Rosh Hashanah this year starts toward the end of September. Last year it was early September, and my music director Laura Steinell and her husband Dan are here. Laura and I both really appreciate when it's late September. Hanukkah was close to Thanksgiving last year. This year will be at the end of December. So the other confusing piece is that Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, occurs on the first day of the 7th month of the Jewish calendar, not the first month. Think in terms of the creation story culminating on day 7, not on day 1, and 7 in Judaism is also a symbol of wholeness or completeness. So while the calendar is a continuous circular cycle, making it difficult to have one starting point, I'll start with the first month of the calendar. That is in early spring, it's occurring really in late March, early April. The month in Hebrew is Nisan. It's the month in which we observe Passover. It begins our journey as a people. Being redeemed by God, freed from bondage in Egypt, it is a celebration of spring and a time of rebirth, creating an opportunity for the transforming who we are and how we act. From an agrarian standpoint, it's the barley harvest. This is the first of 3 Jewish holidays connected to a harvest. These 3 festivals are also known in Hebrew as Shalosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, in which people would make pilgrimage to the temple to make their special offerings. So from here we move toward the next big festival of Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks. But to get there, we count off 49 days from the second night of Passover until we get through day 49. This counting is known as the counting of the Omer, and Omer is a sheaf offering. Once we've gotten through the 49 days of counting, we arrive at the holiday of Shavuot on day 50. From an emotional standpoint, we come off of the celebratory nature of Passover, freedom from bondage, that's what we're celebrating, come off a long winter, and for me, actually, it's my favorite holiday, the rituals of the Passover Seder, in which we have time to talk about the big life issues, is always a gift. But the 49-day period of the counting of the Omer in between Passover and Shavuot is a time of great trepidation. It bounces off the celebratory nature of Passover, and it's somewhat of a downtime. Traditionally, Jewish weddings don't occur during the majority of this period, and there are acts of comfort and happiness that are postponed. We are trepidatious in waiting for the results of the upcoming wheat harvest that's celebrated on Shavuot, but let's face it, farming is a crapshoot with things like weather and insects being somewhat out of our hands. As a theological people, now that we are free from slavery, we really don't know what's coming next or what God has in store for us. The adjustments to keep on track with the Gregorian calendar come in the form of 7 leap years, other direction. What ends up coming next is Shavuot, the second of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And yes, it is a wheat harvest, but as a people, we Jews aren't doing a lot of farming these days. For us, it celebrates the receiving of our Torah at Mount Sinai and entering into a covenant with God. So we have come from being slaves in Egypt to being in servitude to God, what we refer to in Hebrew as me'eved le'eved, from slaves to servitude, with the idea that we're always in servitude to something. It's just a question of what. And to be in relationship with something bigger than ourselves. To not just be takers in the relationship with God, but to be able to give something back. To live our lives with cosmic purpose and meaning. So from Shavuot, which is early summer, fast forward to what is known as the Hebrew month of Av. And it's not a celebration, it's a commemoration of events known as Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is literally the 9th day of the month of Av, and we actually just observed it last Saturday night and Sunday. It is a day when we observe every awful thing that has befallen the Jewish people. The destruction of 2 temples and being put into exile, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, and for that matter, the lesser known but equally awful Portuguese Inquisition, which lasted a lot longer, actually into the early 19th century. Pogroms, you name it, all the bad stuff, we think about it on that day. It is, other than Yom Kippur, the only major fast day on the Jewish calendar. It is preceded by 3 weeks of contemplating what persecution means and whether we bear responsibility for bringing it on ourselves through our own wrong behavior. During these 3 weeks, we abstain from certain pleasures, and we read from the book of Jeremiah during these 3 weeks, reading Jeremiah's warnings about our wrong behavior, particularly what we refer to in Hebrew as sinat kinam, or baseless hatred, something that sounds all too familiar these days, and how that will bring about our demise. On Tisha B'Av itself, we read from the book of Lamentations, in which is described the horrible punishment and exile we experience for not heeding Jeremiah's admonitions. It is an emotionally depressing time, a time of despair and seeming hopelessness. In these moments of persecution and suffering, God either is present only to punish us, or God seems absent. Thankfully, immediately following Tisha B'Av, we get a reprieve. There are 7 weeks, starting to become a common theme, right after Tisha B'Av, right up until Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, that is a time of consolation. We read from the prophet Isaiah words of consolation and comfort. God indeed has not abandoned us. We are capable of righting our wrong behavior. We are not hopeless in God's eyes, and we are not without hope for our future. We need this time of recovery and comfort after Tisha B'Av in order to prepare for the work that comes with the 10 days of atonement from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. We are required during those 10 days, which again begins toward the end of September this year, to undertake what is referred to as a cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of our souls. We contemplate what wrong behavior we have engaged in over the past year and commit ourselves to do better in the year to come. We are not just required to apologize to those we have wronged, but to actually turn our wrong behavior 180 degrees, to not repeat the same wrong behavior if given the opportunity to do so again. This time of deep contemplation and self-critique is difficult work. If we'd gone immediately from Tisha B'Av with its sense of hopelessness into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it would be too difficult to confront our own behavioral deficiencies. Thoughts would creep in such as, maybe I'm beyond redemption and hope is futile, so why bother changing my behavior? We need to get our sense of hope built back up to know there is a reason to do better. 5 days after Yom Kippur is Sukkot, Festival of Booths. It is the third of the 3 pilgrimage festivals of the fall harvest. We build our flimsy temporary booths as the farmers in antiquity did in the field during the harvest, and as legend would have it, as the children of Israel did while wandering in the wilderness. After the hard work of Yom Kippur, we actually are commanded to be happy. It is known as Zman Simchatenu, the season of our joy, the one time we are actually commanded to have this feeling of happiness. We also perform the commandment of welcoming the stranger, welcoming guests into our sukkah. So after we promise on Yom Kippur to do better in the year to come, with Sukkot, we are immediately given the opportunity to act on what we promised, to do better, to welcome the stranger in. There's much more on the Jewish calendar, like Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, occurring during the shortest and darkest days of the year. But I want to get back to why this sense of emotional awareness might matter to all of us. For all of us who care about creating a world of justice and light, of compassion and hope, these have been the most difficult times. People in power who govern with cruelty, with narcissistic and hedonistic purpose, seem to both figuratively and literally get away with murder. It is easy to fall into a state of despair, bereft of hope. Around the corner from the next sign of hope and progress is the next act of cruelty, driven solely by the lust for power. It would be really easy just to give up. In these moments, how do we as clergy and all of us find the means to push forward into action to continue the pursuit of justice? Is there a balance to be struck between Jeremiah's seemingly harsh words of admonition and Isaiah's words of comfort and hope? Is the answer positive reinforcement and encouragement to release the shackles of despair, or do we raise our fists in anger in response to the malaise of apathy? Or are these even the right questions to ask? And what is also a very Jewish response to the answer to all these questions is yes. And then after that we say, let's discuss it some more. But more to the point is that we all are sharing in these emotions together. Fear and anger, hope and perseverance. It is in the act of coming together in spiritual community that our emotions receive validation and much needed support. The circular cycle of our calendar becomes a line of compassionate progress that moves us forward while we walk together on the journey. I have and will continue to say that it is being in space with many good people that I find my sanity and my hope. It is in finding myself at a place like this church, like Peace Church on this Sunday morning, that I can give words of hope with a sense of authenticity. You never know, the next time you come into shared space, someone might even accuse you of being a visionary. The truth is that all of us who enter sacred space working for and envisioning a future of justice, compassion, and peace, we are all visionaries, imagining a brighter future. So may we all move forward together with courage, strength, and hope to make our shared vision of a better world a reality, and may that vision come true in our lifetime. Kain Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will.